Unfortunately and sadly, the conversation and the dialogue around the world today is about violence, and it was tied directly to the shooting incident that happened in New Zealand overnight. Scores of people dead, and at two mosque shootings that happened. So I do have a guest who's with me this morning on the Jersey Central Newsmaker Hotline, and she's written a book, and it is the first of its kind to address the emotional fallout, and this book sort of deals more along the lines of school shootings and dealing with your children and what to say and how to act around them. She's a licensed social worker and a family therapist, and she's with me this morning on WCTC. We'll say good morning to Nancy Kislin, who is with us here this morning. Nancy, good morning. It is Burt Barron. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. And what went through your mind this morning when you got news of another shooting? It's a faraway corner of the world, but it just kind of goes to show that gun violence exists no matter where you go on this planet.
It's the same reaction. It's that punch in the stomach and my hand to my head saying, how many children are watching this while they eat their breakfast or their parents are driving them to school.
Yeah, as a parent, Nancy, and you're riding in your car with your kid, and if they're listening to WCTC and they're hearing about this gun violence and whatnot, is there anything that you would recommend or suggest that a parent should say to their kids in times like this when it's kind of the conversation that's happening around the world?
Yes. I think the first thing is to have that conversation, to stop whatever you're doing other than driving, and look at your kid if you can, if they're next to you. And if they're in the back, say, wow, and check in with them. Hey, did you just hear that? I always say it's better to ask the questions than, I never want parents to just start lecturing, because most of our kids will just tune out and most of the kids will just zone out into their whatever device they have, right? But it's to maybe you don't do a whole big conversation in the car. You check in, hopefully at dinner time or when you're putting them to bed, and you say, ask questions. Did you have any special conversation today about what happened in New Zealand or wherever in the world something happened? Or just, I heard there was a lockdown drill in your school this week, today. How are you doing with that? I don't know that much about the drills. Can you tell me what it is like? Asking those open-ended questions and giving them time to answer. Get curious. That's what I always say. Get curious about their experience.
And don't be afraid to ask questions to your children. And those a couple examples that you gave right there, like you said, great icebreakers, so to speak, that are open-ended, that force your kid to kind of like talk about some things that are happening in detail, what's going on with them. And you have to wonder, Nancy, about the impacts of what this has on kids who are in schools, not only here in our state, but really around the country when they're talking about armed guards and all these other things. What sort of impact emotionally is this having on kids? I think that's the question that maybe people aren't discussing.
Great question, because that really is what I'm finding is that nobody's having this conversation. I find parents aren't having the conversation with kids. Teachers and administrators aren't having the conversation with kids and or with the parents. And even people in my profession I'm finding are not having this conversation is, how is this I call it the era of fear, of raising children in this climate of fear. How is this affecting them? What I did find through all my interviews and all my research for the book was that we are seeing a rise in anxiety and depression and self-harming behaviors. Can we put it all to this? No, but we can't exclude that this is what's happening, and it's a new recent phenomenon. It's, most of it goes back to Sandy Hook. After Sandy Hook, there was a big drastic change in protocol.
Yeah. As great as social media and gamings and online games can be, Nancy, and we know that they've got an upside, they've got a downside too. Virtual violence. I see these games. We know people that play them. Is there a way that parents should deal with those if maybe they feel their kids are maybe spending a little much time online, maybe with the wrong people or seeing or doing the wrong things? How do you deal with that?
That is such a big question. I think the first thing I always encourage parents to do is you have to know where your kid's hanging out, right? You have to, whether I encourage parents to have a family meeting once a week and sit down and spend some time, again, get curious and find out where your child's spending time. What are they viewing on YouTube? What games are they playing? And often kids will tell me, "Oh, lady, it's not violent. There's no blood." "Oh, okay, but is there killing?" And they'll be like, "Yes, that's the whole point of the game." So monitor. I mean, the average kid, well, let's say the average middle school boy that I've spoken to spends easily 5 to 8 hours a day.
Wow.
5 to 8 hours a day. That's not including weekend time, doing some form of gaming. So think of the impact of all of those violent images filling that child's head. And then also, I find the other day just something popped up on my screen, on my social media feed, and it was something pretty violent, and it was an image, thank God, that I had never seen before. And I thought, what if an 8-year-old girl saw that, or a 12-year-old? So one, parents need to monitor, and two is create that atmosphere where the child and you can talk about what they're seeing.
Yeah. The role that the media plays in all this, Nancy, does the media over-sensationalize things like this? Is there should there be more responsibility, you think, in terms of reporting? And the events here in Christchurch, New Zealand, I think, are a very good example. Let's face it, television survives by how many eyeballs are on the screen. But does the media do a disservice when it comes to discussing and covering and talking about gun violence? Because that the network news, they're going to have somebody tonight in New Zealand who's going to be doing some live stuff there. The media's role in all this, could we do a better job as far as dealing with issues like this?
Well, I think you're amazing because you are the first person to put me on the radio and talk about this issue. And that's really the purpose of the book I just wrote, was to be a wake-up call that we need to have these conversations. So, yes, you all have to do your job, but how do we add this dialogue to the larger conversation, encouraging parents that this can't be a taboo subject, right? And that I put really the responsibility on parents monitoring, the news has been on for 3 hours. Do you really need to keep rerunning that story? Or, you figure it out. But 10 minutes might be enough to have that story. And I often say, parents say, "Oh, my kid's in high school." So what? It's still, we sometimes think that our children, because they see so much violence, that it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that.
Yeah, the book, again, is called Lockdown, Talking to Your Kids About School Violence, and it's really the first of its kind to address the emotional fallout that comes from school shootings or any sort of shootings and things that we see around the world. The traditional booksellers online and brick-and-mortar stores, Nancy, is where people can find the book?
Yes, it's actually lockdownbook.com.
Okay.
Sorry, and Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And really, my message is I'm working with schools as well as parents to really have this conversation that if this is our new reality, we have to do a better job to help our children cope.